Word of the week is Kerygma. Let's take a look at it. Kerygma comes from kerux, and it is a proclamation or an announcement by a herald. So, a kerygma is a proclamation delivered by a kerux. The kerux is the herald. In the ancient world, important people had heralds. Someone who would go before them and announce their impending arrival, someone who would carry a message to a large group. Let's say you were a householder and you owned a lot of land, and there were people who lived on your land and paid a percentage of what they grew to you, etc., and you had a message. Your herald would go and gather the people and make the announcements, proclamations, declare edicts, all that sort of thing. So your herald was your representative who announced news for you, carried out tasks that you assigned, sort of your representative on the ground. This is a person who's entrusted with your most important information, tasks, and things like that. They also acted like personal servants, but an interesting distinction is heralds were virtually never slaves themselves. So these were free people who were in high regard, were considered to be clever and wise, were given great trust, but they were never peers. So they were always working on behalf of someone, quote, greater, end quote, than themselves. In Homer's Iliad, we see Achilles come back from a day on the battlefield. And this is close quarters, hand-to-hand, face-to-face battle. And when he returns to the camp, he's dirty and sweaty and bloody, and it's a mess. And his heralds prepare a bath for him. So it's a significant thing that the heralds are not just entrusted with the great task, they're entrusted with a close relationship to this person that they represent. What are the qualities of a kerux, of a herald? What are the things that we know from history were important? First and foremost, the kerux has to have a great voice, a powerful voice that can be heard by a crowd. What good is someone who makes proclamations if they can't be heard, right? So qualification number one, a booming, powerful voice. Qualification number two, the ability to accurately communicate the message as it was received. So the heralds don't speak for themselves. The heralds don't get to embellish. The heralds speak for the one to whom they report, and they must be able to act as a spokesperson and not communicate with an agenda of their own. There's a great example of a bad herald in a famous movie. If you've ever seen the movie A Knight's Tale with Heath Ledger, Geoffrey Chaucer is a character in the movie. And before the knight, the pseudo-knight, goes into his tournaments, Geoffrey Chaucer comes out and makes big introductions of him. So Chaucer is functioning as a herald, but Chaucer is functioning as a herald who's promoting himself at least as much as he is promoting the champion he's introducing. That's not a good herald, that's a bad herald. Let's carry on. So let's look at the kerux in the Old Testament as it's described in the New Testament. Okay, so here is 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 5 from the ESV, and I'm inserting the Koine in the appropriate place. If he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald, Kerygma, of righteousness with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly. So in 2 Peter, Peter gives this list of events where God intervened or didn't intervene. And one of them is, he says, Noah functioned as a righteous herald. Noah's God's pre-flood herald to the world. Hey, God's about to do this big thing, and you can either get with God and survive or not get with God and not survive. And so Noah, as God's herald, not only proclaimed the message, but he was the active agent in bringing about the fulfillment of that message. If Noah doesn't build the ark, then the message doesn't have any real meaning, right? There's no way out of the flood if Noah, the herald, doesn't also build the ark on behalf of the God who sent him as herald. So great stuff, which leads us to a verb, keruso. So keruso is the verb that comes from kerux. The herald, when he proclaims, that's what keruso is. I proclaim, I announce. It's the act of doing the work of a herald, keruso, which brings us to today's word of the week, kerygma, which is a combination of the act of proclaiming and the content of that which is proclaimed. The kerygma is the announcement and the announcing. So what is it not? It's not a 20-minute planned speech with 3 points and a conclusion, like a sermon. That comes later. That's a much later development. Although the word is used to describe preaching in, for instance, in Titus, verse 3, and in Timothy, it's used to describe preaching as well. But it's the proclamation of an event, right? Noah comes and says, hey, it's fixing to rain, and it's going to rain for a long time. And if you're not right with God, the rain's going to kill you. But I've got great news for you. There's a way out. I'm going to build this ark, and everyone who gets on lives, and those who don't. So it's proclaiming an event. John the Baptist comes and says, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight his paths, flatten down the hills, because the Lord is coming. Oh, there's an event happening. It's a significant event, and I'm being called to get ready for it, right? So let's carry on and take a look at an example of kerygma. So in secular Greek, kerygma is news, a declaration, a demand, an order, a decree, an announcement, but again, not just the content, but also the act of proclaiming it. So let's take a look at a great example in Matthew chapter 12, verse 41, again in the ESV and with the Koine supplied. The men of Nineveh will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for they repented at the preaching, to kerygma, of Jonah, and behold, something greater than Jonah is here. So they repented at the preaching of Jonah, at the kerygma of Jonah. So it's not just what Jonah said, it's the fact that Jonah said it, right? Because it doesn't matter what the content of his message is if he doesn't deliver it. And it doesn't matter if he gets up and spouts some nonsense, the content has to match the deliverance. So what we're told is the Ninevites will testify at the judgment because they heard the kerygma, they experienced the proclaiming and what was proclaimed by Jonah, and as a result, they repented. His speaking and what he spoke resulted in changed minds, hearts, and destinies. So what does that tell us? That tells us that Jonah must have been a heck of a preacher. Is that what it tells us? Maybe, because if we go to Marshall McLuhan, right, the media is the message. So sometimes the communicator, if the communicator isn't good, what's communicated doesn't matter. But that really shouldn't be the case, right? If the message is significant and it's understandable and understood, the messenger shouldn't be all that important. Which brings us to Brother Paul, and we're going to look in 1 Corinthians 2, verses 2 through 5, this time from the NIV, because The ESV in this case doesn't differentiate very well between the two words that Paul uses here. So from the NIV, again, Koine supplied. For I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I came to you in weakness with great fear and trembling. My message, logos, and my preaching, kerygma, were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not rest on human wisdom, but on God's power. So, he says, powerful content, powerful Spirit, not powerful Paul. Okay? Now, the challenge there is, I make no secret, I just love Paul. He's my favorite biblical writer. I love his mind. I love the way he crafts his message. I love the clarity of his thinking. But all that aside, Paul comes along and he says, I don't want you to take this based on clever words and persuasive speech, although he's clearly bringing clever words and persuasive speech. I want you to know that this isn't about me, it's about Christ and him crucified, and a demonstration not of my rhetorical prowess, but of the power of the God for whom I am herald. Right? Kerygma. He says that his word, his logos, and his kerygma, so his regular talk with the people and his standing before them and delivering his message, his kerygma, in both cases, he doesn't want it to be about him. He wants it to be about Christ and him crucified and the power of the Spirit of the God who sent him. Pretty awesome stuff. So, kerygma, the content and presentation from kerux, the herald, speaking not on your own behalf, not promoting your own agenda or your own self, but delivering the message as it was given to you, so that hopefully it will be clearly understood, well received, and perhaps even result in the changed hearts, minds, and destinies of those who hear it. Not because of how clever and wise you are, not because of your persuasive and powerful speech, but because of the power of the Spirit of the one whose herald you may be. Great stuff. Kerygma, word of the week. Until next time, Karis Kai Arena Humin, grace and peace to you.